Hello guys and welcome back to CS with Mr. G. In today's lesson we are looking at this term robotics, looking at the key characteristics of a robot, making sure we understand what is meant by the term robotics, describing the characteristics and looking at the advantages and disadvantages of their use. This lesson links with our previous lesson where we looked at automated systems, and a lot of the automated systems that we looked at include the devices that we would class as robots. So we can tie these two lessons together as a lot of the topics and key terms cross over, and also the advantages and disadvantages are also very similar to those of an automated system. So if you haven't watched already, go back a lesson and that will give you a solid foundation to ensure we have a deeper understanding of Unit 6 as a whole. Firstly, let's look at the attributes of a robot and the three rules that we consider all robots to have. In that, number one, they have a mechanical structure or some kind of framework. You will have heard of the term robot before in your life, and they all come in different shapes and sizes, but the first attribute of a robot is that it has some kind of mechanical structure. Questions that test your knowledge on these attributes appear quite a lot in the exams, and the 2025 exam that's just been included a question asking for the identification of an attribute for a robot, and all you would have had to have said is one of these attributes right here. So firstly, the mechanical structure. Secondly, they have electrical components such as sensors, microprocessors, and actuators. The same three components that we looked at in last lesson, so the same as an automated system. And then lastly, they are programmable. So robots are programmed to do a job, to follow instructions, and to serve some kind of purpose, whichever role they are made for. So these three attributes, they are the definition of a robot, and again, this question does appear in the exam. So like I've mentioned, they all come in different shapes and sizes, but the first attribute, a mechanical structure or a framework, just means that the robot has some kind of body or skeleton, and again this could be in many different shapes and sizes. We tend to think of robots to look similar to a human, but devices such as automatic floor cleaners or vacuums that find their way around your floor, these would also be classed as a robot because they have all of these three attributes. A robotic arm in a factory also follows all of these three attributes, so we would also class this as a robot. But again, point number one, they have some kind of mechanical structure, giving it that label and definition of a robot. Point number two, electrical components, speaks for itself, kind of obvious, but what we have to do is name these electrical components, relating back to that previous lesson, talking about sensors, microprocessors, and actuators, which also contribute to an automated system. So being able to describe these three terms and know that they are the three parts that contribute to the definition of a robot, you should be okay in defining that attribute. And thirdly, they are programmable, so we can give the robot instructions in order for it to do some kind of job or to serve a purpose, whether it's in a factory, whether it's in your home. They follow lines of code that have been written and tell the robot exactly what to do. And there are two different ways in which they can be programmed. If the program that they follow cannot be changed and stored in ROM, then that's an option. Or if they serve different purposes and can do different jobs, programs can be altered to serve different purposes. That is also an option for a robot. But as you may know, as we move forward in time, robots appear more and more through our general day-to-day lives, and we are starting to see them more often in different environments. So what we'll do now is we'll go through a few different environments in which we see robots. These are straight from the textbook. This list is endless, but I'm just going to give you a few examples, but just be aware they may appear in many more different environments than listed in this video. So again, if we think back to lesson 1, where we talked about automated systems and when we would use them, and these three descriptions here, if something is too dangerous, if something is boring or repetitive, or even if something is too difficult for a human, this is when we would tend to use a robot to do our job for us. So in industry, working in factories to build things like cars or electronics, again, when things can be considered boring or tedious, this is exactly when we could use a robot, like you can see in the examples here. If something's too heavy for a human to pick up, if a job is considered boring for a human to do for 8 hours straight, then again, this is when we could use a robot to do this job for us. We also have medical robots that can work in hospitals, performing jobs like surgeries, delivering medicine, or helping with rehabilitation. And the advantage here is that they can work to a very high accuracy, especially for things that require very high precision, such as surgeries, for example, open heart surgery, or working on the brain, something that the human hand might not be able to do and keep steady. Robots could serve a purpose in this line of work. We also have this term service robots, which will perform everyday services, such as cleaning, even serving food, interactive displays in public places such as airports or shopping centers. Although it might not sound obvious, if we think back to the three attributes, even machines like self-service checkouts in supermarkets fall under these three categories, so we could consider them as a robot. A self-service checkout has a mechanical structure. It certainly has electrical components, such as a barcode reader, which is a sensor, definitely a microprocessor, and then actuators, or some kind of output, such as the screen that you can see, the machine that prints out your receipt, and speakers to alert you if you might need help. And thirdly, they are definitely programmable. So again, service robots, although they might not seem like robots, we can class them as robots because they fall under those three categories. Exploration robots definitely allow us to do jobs that are considered too dangerous. Things like deep sea exploration or even in space. We can send robots to do this job, receive a live feed, and see exactly what they are seeing as if humans are there themselves. So exploration robots is another category listed in the textbook for the course. And finally, we have military and security robots, which again would be considered jobs that are definitely too dangerous for humans. Things like disarming bombs, surveillance, and even now we've seen them in combat scenarios, which again would be considered too dangerous for a human. So if we just look at the pros of using robots, and if you watch that first video in Unit 6, you will definitely recognize most of these as they directly cross over for both topics. We can talk about efficiency in terms of robots working faster and definitely for longer periods without getting tired, which in essence means that they will complete jobs more quickly and also produce more work as an overall output. Precision we've mentioned, they can perform tasks with a very high level of accuracy. We talked about open heart surgery, for example, needing steady hands. If jobs require something to be completed to the nearest nanometer, this would certainly be too difficult for a human. Safety, again, if it's too dangerous for a human to work in a certain scenario, it makes much more sense to use a robot for that job. Consistency ties in heavily with efficiency. Repetitive tasks, boring jobs. Robot can do the same job over and over again. They won't make mistakes, they won't get bored, and simply ensure a consistent quality of work. And then just like automated systems, we've got the cost effectiveness of a robot. From a business standpoint, if you're not paying people to do a job for you, it could be considered that you are saving money in the long run, especially if we tie this in with the efficiency and consistency. Humans do make mistakes, humans do get tired, so the cost effectiveness could be a huge advantage from a business perspective, just like automated systems. However, something that the course also wants you to understand is the ethical approach of robots and whether things are right and wrong, especially when it comes to the job industry. And some interesting discussions we have in my classes is how the use of robots affects jobs in the real world. Some of you may know people who've lost jobs because of robots. You can certainly think of jobs that will be lost due to robots. But again, from an ethical standpoint, so whether things are right or wrong, it's definitely something to think about when it comes to the use of robots in the real world. So although it's seen as a positive in terms of the cost and not having to hire people, you can also consider it a negative impact on society as there aren't going to be any jobs for humans to do. We can also contrast the cost of them, as the initial outlay of a robot can be expensive and some businesses might not be able to afford them at all. Although in the long run you might save money by not hiring people, if you haven't got that money up front to install or buy the robot itself, it might not even be an option for some businesses. So the initial cost we do consider as high. Lack of flexibility. So robots are very good at doing a specific task, but if something changes or the environment that they work in changes, this is where they might struggle, as a human can use their initiative and common sense in order to adapt to that new situation that they find themselves in. If a robot on a production line is doing the same job to the exact millimeter over and over again, if something is slightly off, a robot may not be able to handle this, as it's only been programmed to work to something to a certain millimeter. But again, humans have common sense, they also have creativity, which robots don't, and again we can list this as a disadvantage of using them. They also need maintaining, which comes at a cost. If your business relies heavily on a robot and it needs servicing in the middle of the working day, this could affect your business, and it's also something to look out for. And finally, we come back to this term, ethics. What's right and wrong about robots in all the different scenarios that we've mentioned? Is it right or wrong to use them? We can talk about privacy concerns, potential misuse. We could have a whole lesson on the ethics of using robots, but just showing an awareness is what's required of the course, and something I hope that you're able to understand from this video. And just to finish off, a quick knowledge check. So by all means, give the video a pause and attempt the questions yourself. And what I'd like you to do is recall the 3 characteristics of a robot and then give 2 pros and 2 cons for using robots. In this scenario, we were looking at keeping elderly people happy and giving them some kind of company to make them feel like they're not on their own. So nice and easy, the 3 characteristics: mechanical structure or framework, nice and easy. The 3 components: sensors, microprocessors, and actuators, just like an automated system. And finally, they are programmable to follow instructions set by us. And the advantages, what we can say is that they can work 24 hours a day without any breaks. So they could work at any time of the day for the elderly people. We can talk about the cost of them, be cheaper than employing humans. And if they are programmed correctly and they do the job well, they could do this job consistently and again doing it for 24 hours a day like we just mentioned. However, in this scenario, it's fairly easy to name two disadvantages, starting with the obvious point as it's not real human contact. If we're talking about keeping people company, especially elderly people, a robot in this scenario wouldn't be like company from a human. So just be mindful, people lose touch with real human contact in these circumstances. But again, just think of it from a common sense point of view and just go back to this point of ethics, which we keep talking about, if things are right or wrong. And that's it for our second lesson in Unit 6, guys. It's only a short lesson. We've got one more lesson left looking at artificial intelligence. So I hope you've understood the points in this lesson, and I hope to see you in the final video of Unit 6.